living longer, living healthier, living better than ever before. Welcome to Mountain Pacific's Healthy Living for Life, a weekly series that gives you the information, education, and expert insight you need to become an active participant in today's ever-changing healthcare climate. Here now is today's program host.
COVID-19 has changed our world. What we thought would be temporary inconvenience has turned into a devastating ordeal, consuming 2020 and following us into 2021. Welcome to Healthy Living for Life, a show dedicated to helping you do just that. I'm Sarah Medley, your host. We'll review COVID over the last few months and what we might see in the new year. Stay tuned. Welcome back to Healthy Living for Life. Joining us first today is Becky Hillier. Becky had COVID along with her husband, and she is thankfully here to tell her story. She was very ill, as was her husband. So Becky, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, it's my pleasure.
Becky and I were talking off camera about the need to tell more personal stories. So I applaud you for being brave and telling that story far and wide. It's a good one to tell. Let's start off by first question, how were you exposed and when did you get COVID? When were you diagnosed?
It appears my exposure came from my husband because his symptoms started about 2.5-3 days before mine did. So we believe that he was exposed first and then passed that on to me. My confirmation of my positive COVID case came on Sunday, September 24th or September 27th. I was tested on the 24th and got my results back on the 27th. As far as where he may have been exposed to it, we're not exactly sure. He's a police officer with the city of Billings, and his current assignment is as a school resource officer for a couple of middle schools. So he may have been exposed at one of the schools. He may have been exposed at the store. We don't know. And at this point, it's a moot point because we both had it. But again, his symptoms mine started about 2.5-3 days after his began.
What were your first symptoms?
Well, my first symptoms were a little misleading for me because every fall or winter, I get a whopper of a cold. And it always starts the same way. I get a little bit of a scratchy throat, a little bit of a cough, and some body aches, a low-grade fever. So I was experiencing those on Thursday morning. I was concerned that it was maybe more than my regular cough because he was having those same symptoms on that Monday evening. And he never gets my cold. He never has those symptoms. And so that's when I started to think that it might be something more than just my seasonal cold that I get, that it might actually be something more serious and could potentially be COVID because he just doesn't get those symptoms like I did. So those were the first symptoms right off the bat. Very familiar to me, almost discounted them because they are so familiar, but they ended up being something more serious.
So who sought medical care first, you or your husband?
My husband was tested first. His symptoms started on a Monday night, so he was tested Wednesday. We got his results back on a Friday. I was tested Friday. My results came back on a Sunday. We actually did not get any kind of medical attention until that following week because we were quarantined at home. So by Monday of that second week, he had it for 7 days. I'd had it for about 4 days. And our symptoms were just getting worse. And we didn't really know how to manage those symptoms effectively from home. So by Wednesday, I think it was Wednesday of that week, he called his doctor to ask if there was anything that they could do for him to help him with that horrible dry cough that he had. And I had as well. But his doctor said that they could prescribe some steroids and possibly a Z-Pak, which had been shown to be effective for some people suffering from COVID symptoms. And so his doctor was comfortable prescribing that for him over the phone. Our son went and picked it up at the drugstore and dropped it off on our front porch. So he took those, he started taking the steroids and the Z-Pak and really found no relief from those at all. I had messaged my nurse practitioner I believe it was on Wednesday, and asked her if she could maybe prescribe those for me so that I could try them because I too had that terrible cough. I got a call back from my nurse practitioner's office Friday morning, and the nurse told me that my nurse practitioner was not comfortable prescribing anything for me without seeing me first. And I said, okay, well, can I come in and see her then? And she said, well, no, you're in quarantine, which made sense. And I said, so there's nothing I can do. And I just felt so incredibly desperate because we'd been languishing in the house trying to manage these symptoms for, well, it was 9 days by that time for me and 12 days for my husband with no relief. And I didn't think that there was anything that I could do. And she said, well, if you want, you can go into the ER. If you're having shortness of breath, they may want to evaluate you to check your oxygen levels. And they can maybe prescribe something for you there, like an inhaler. And that was the last thing I wanted to do, was to get dressed and drive to the ER to get treatment. But that really was our only option because we had no relief from the symptoms at home. We didn't know how to manage them at home.
I've heard about coughs and that the cough can be excruciating. Talk to us about the cough.
You know, the cough is the worst part of it, hands down, because the cough leads to that shortness of breath and then also the heaviness and the tightness in your chest. It feels like your chest is spasming. So just you and I talking here would have sparked an out of control coughing fit for me. Even just breathing regularly, you cannot take a full breath in without it compelling you to cough. And so it's this vicious cycle that you're in. You're coughing, you take a breath in to catch your breath, and it makes you cough even harder and longer. And it's a dry cough. Again, it's not productive whatsoever. So it just feels like it's just tearing you apart inside when you're coughing. My husband was coughing so violently at times, he would bend over to cough and his knees would raise up to his cheeks. Oh. And it was just very scary.
I can't even imagine. In the few seconds left, do you have any sequela, any lingering problems?
We do not. We did for about 2 to 3 weeks. I know I did for about 2 to 3 weeks. The body aches and pains persisted for 2 to 3 weeks for me. I had a raw throat. But right now I can say that we're both 100% recovered.
Oh, Becky, thank you so much for telling your story. That went way too fast. I appreciate your time. I'm glad you're here to tell it.
I am too. Thank you very much.
We have to pause for a break, and when we come back, we'll be speaking about healthcare providers, a couple of experts, and we'll talk about hospitals and how they're dealing with COVID. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Joining us now, Rich Rasmussen, President and CEO of the Montana Hospital Association, and Eric Boley, President of the Wyoming Hospital Association and President of Leading Age Wyoming, join us. So thank you, gentlemen, for both being on Healthy Living for Life.
Thank you, Sarah.
According to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the first positive COVID case was diagnosed January 20th. And the public health officials obviously raced very diligently trying to flatten the curve and stop the spread. So I'm going to turn to you, Rich, first. How well do you think we were able to do that, if at all?
Well, Sarah, and thank you for giving us the opportunity to spend this time with you today. I think as we look at what we've done since the first case was reported, or for that matter, since the pandemic was declared by the president, and certainly most states also followed suit with their own public health declarations. But since then, what we have done is really built up an infrastructure that we really didn't have in most states. So if you look at Montana as one example, Montana does a great job of responding to forest fires, but public health emergencies a state that I came from, where we had a public health emergency almost every weekend coming from Florida with tropical events. We don't have that in this state or in this region. So I think as we walked into this pandemic, it was a series of events that we all stepped back and said, do we have the infrastructure in place? Do we have the planning in place? And I think most public health professionals would argue that they knew this was going to be a long-term event. And so what we spend a lot of our time doing is building up that infrastructure, putting those plans in place. So where we are today with a significant surge, at least in our region of the country, we're in a much better position in our ability to respond. We just have some challenges that are somewhat outside of our control, and we can get into those a little bit more.
Thank you. So what would you add to that, Eric?
Well, Sarah, I think Rich did a great job. I do agree. We were able to flatten the curve to a certain degree and give us a better chance to be prepared for what we're facing now. And I think part of that is our lifestyle, the fact that we already are kind of socially isolated or distanced from one another in a rural community. I think a lot of outdoor activities also led to that. But I agree that we're in a better place now than we would have been last spring. And now we're in the heat of the battle.
Yeah. So let's talk about the heat of the battle, Eric. Why do you think our numbers are going up so much and we have this big surge going on?
Well, Sarah, I think it's pretty easy to determine. You know, we've got folks that are not following the same protocols that they were earlier. Weather's getting colder. We're having larger gatherings. People are getting together more. And I also think that it took time for the virus to work its way across the country. I think there are a lot of different things that have led to this, but we could kind of see it coming, and now luckily we're in a better place to deal with what we have before us.
So I'm going to turn to Rich again and ask a very salient question. How are our hospitals dealing with the surge?
Well, I can speak for Montana, and Eric can certainly talk about Wyoming. But what we are doing today is using all of that planning that we put into motion beginning in the first quarter of the year. And so our hospitals today are responding to the best of their capabilities. We continue to have challenges. And for that matter, the challenges that we're experiencing in Montana aren't much different from other areas of the country. Staffing, for example, is one of them that we all are reaching a breaking point on. The ability to backfill our staff and to provide the respite that they need, as well as also staffing that are necessary to step in when somebody else has been exposed or is COVID positive themselves. But in Montana, we are seeing that our largest hospitals are shouldering 75% of the total COVID patient load in our state. In Billings, for example, our two largest PPS hospitals, those facilities are carrying all of eastern Montana on their shoulders. And we find out that on any given day, most of our facilities are either at their maximum staffing capacity or very near it. And we spend every morning on a COVID huddle with chief medical officers to balance the load of patients across the state. And so we're being ever vigilant and diligent in this, but there's a role and responsibility for the public. And I think Eric talked a little bit about that, and hopefully we'll have a chance to spend a few more moments talking about that.
Absolutely. So Eric, what would you add?
I think things are very similar here in Wyoming as they are in Montana. We have a very large state with very few facilities, and we have mainly critical access hospitals in a lot of our rural areas. And so we are seeing our larger facilities shoulder the burden and treat most of the COVID patients. On a daily basis, we're setting new records as far as hospitalizations in the last week. And I'm awfully proud of the work that our hospitals and their staffs are doing around the state. It's a tremendous lift, but I'm proud of the work they've done. But like Rich mentioned, we're really facing a staffing shortage as our healthcare professionals get sick, as they're exposed to COVID and they have to quarantine. Finding certified staff to come in and to backfill seems to be the biggest challenge. We actually have beds available, and we're prepared to do more with surges, but the ability to actually staff those is going to be the biggest challenge, I think, not only Montana and Wyoming are facing, but what we're facing across the country right now.
And Sarah, if I could add just to that a little bit, because our experiences are the same. And one of the challenges that we have that is making the capacity challenges even greater is our inability to be able to move patients through the continuum of care out of the hospital and into skilled nursing. And so some of those have been created by regulation, either by local commissioners or it's what's come from CDC and CMS.
I think that's a great point, and we have to pause for a break, but we're going to pick up that comment, Rich, when we return. So please, folks, stay with us. We'll be back. Welcome back. Rich Rasmussen from the Montana Hospital Association and Eric Boley, Wyoming Hospital Association and Leading Age Wyoming are still with us. So thanks for hanging here with us as we talk about COVID. So right before the break, Rich, you were talking about the impact on the long-term care facilities and the ability to transfer patients, et cetera. So let's continue with that and give us your message.
Well, I think what's important, at least what we've been asking, is for our public health officials to come together in a broad consensus on how they're going to approach allowing nursing homes to take patients back. The Montana Hospital Association developed a model, a guideline for that based on what the CDC, CMS, and our state has put together. But until we can get all of our public health leadership on the same page, we're going to continue to have some communities that will let patients back into a nursing home and some that won't. And if we want to decompress the hospitals that are at the greatest volume of patients, we're going to need our long-term care partners to be able to take those patients back. And I know Eric has experienced this in his state as well.
Thank you, Rich. So Eric, comments about the long-term care facilities and need to get those patients back.
Well, it's a tough situation. There are critical beds that are being taken in our hospitals where patients could be discharged to another place to finish their 14-day quarantine or whatever it might be. But taking COVID into long-term care, we know how deadly that is. So it's a delicate balancing act, but there are solutions out there if we can just get those. And we're working on those also here in Wyoming to try and free up bed space for the COVID patients that are coming in and create needed availability in our hospitals.
So Eric, let's stay with you and talk about vaccine. So that's a really exciting thing on the horizon. We're all looking forward to it. What role will the Wyoming hospitals play in distribution of the COVID vaccine?
You're right, Sarah, that is exciting, and I think it can be a big game changer for our states and for the country. The Wyoming Hospital Association, our hospitals will be the main distributors of those. It'll come through the state to our hospitals. They're the ones that actually will have the correct equipment to store those vaccines safely and effectively. And then we'll be in charge of helping to vaccine our healthcare workers and also our seniors in our long-term care facilities first. And then, of course, it'll be distributed to the general public later on. But that seems to be the plan for our state right now.
So, Rich, what about Montana? Similar or not?
The distribution plan is similar in terms of, frontline healthcare workers receiving the first rounds, our vulnerable populations, and moving into the general public. Our nursing home residents and our assisted living residents will receive theirs through a relationship with some of our established pharmacies across the state. But I think, Sarah, one of the biggest challenges we're going to have is rebuilding trust with the American people on the use of this vaccine. If we look at our 328 million people, and we just looked at historical vaccination rates, let's use diphtheria, for example, where about 82% of those who are a part of that target population actually get vaccinated for diphtheria. Even with polio, we only got to 92%. So if we start running the numbers and we take that along with the effective rate of the vaccines we're talking about, we still may end up with as much as 66, maybe 70 million people who won't get vaccinated. And so we need to be able to build trust with the American people so that they will take advantage of this opportunity, so we can, push back on the disruption the virus has had both in our healthcare organizations, in our communities, and our economy. So that's going to be, I think, a tall order for every political leader to be able to build a critical mass of support for this. And if we can do it, we will be successful. And I think Eric is right. We want to be able to get this behind us, but there's still a lot of work to be done ahead of us.
So, gentlemen, does it concern you trying to convince folks to get this vaccine? I mean, I know I promote it at the office in terms of flu vaccines every year, and there are folks that are adamant they will not take a vaccine. So, Eric, start with you. Thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, like Rich said, I think it's a heavy lift, but I also think it's super important. We've seen those that are opposed to the flu vaccine for many, many years, and at least in a healthcare setting, we can tell them, well, if you're not going to take the vaccine, then you need to wear a mask full time. With COVID, I'm not sure how effective that's going to be. Realistically, I think the immunization and immunity to the vaccine, to the virus is what's necessary. So we're going to have to work on it for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Any closing comments on that, Rich?
The only thing I would say is that we have been so far removed from a number of these communicable diseases that we've essentially extinguished with vaccines, whether it's polio or smallpox. We can do the exact same thing here. And we need to rise up as Americans and to support a broad-based effort to vaccinate our country.
Absolutely. Boy, this time went so fast. Thank you, Rich, and thank you, Eric, for joining us and sharing your knowledge. Take good care. And to our viewers, you stay healthy and join us next time. Until then, though, stay fit, stay well, stay healthy for life with Healthy Living for Life. Take care, everyone.
Healthy Living for Life is brought to you by Mountain Pacific Quality Health in partnership with AARP Montana. We'd love to hear from you. If you have suggestions for future programs, visit our website at mpqhf.org or call us at 406-443-4020. You can also catch us on YouTube by visiting our website and clicking on the Healthy Living for Life logo. Production facilities provided by Video Express Productions.